So Jonathan, before we jump in and I start sharing my screen, is there anything that you want to add at this point?
Yeah, did we want to do a round of introductions?
Yeah, that'd be great. That's second on the agenda. So I think everybody should be able to unmute. And why don't we do popcorn style? And I'll pick, so I pick Jonathan. Jonathan, who do you pick?
Okay, always good to go second. So, hey, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Jonathan here, I know a lot of you. Others, I think I'm meeting for the first time today. I work for Local Motion. I'm the Complete Streets Program Manager. One of the things that I do in this role is provide support to the walk bike committees in the county and also in different communities around the state. So I've worked with a lot of you in that capacity. And in general, my role is just focused on improving conditions for walking and biking and rolling in the county and around the state. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thanks. And I will, sorry, I'll call on, how about Adam from Fellowship?
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Adam Morris. I'm work for Fellowship of the Wheel as executive director, and we, for those of you that don't know, help maintain and manage and build trails in sort of 8 distinct networks throughout Chittenden County. And I'll pass it on to one of our partners, Darren, over at Town of Essex.
Thanks, Adam. My name is Darren Schindler. I work for the Town of Essex as the planner and help support the Conservation and Trails Committee. We have a couple of our members here today, and we have been very happy to work with Fellowship on Saxon Hill in particular and helping support their work there. So I will call on one of our members, Steve Dowd. Steve, you're still muted. All right, I'm going to skip Steve and go to Shannon. And Steve, in the meantime, you can figure out how to unmute.
Hey, good morning, team. I'm Shannon Jackson. I serve on the Essex Conservation Trails Committee and really excited to be a part of this today. I will turn it over to Steve if his mute button is working.
So this is Steve Schwartz, and I have to apologize. I had a barking dog. I had to get out of my room. So was the question to me?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, yeah. So this is Steve Schwartz. I am the now chairperson of the Jericho Trails Committee. John Abbott was the chairperson previously, has moved into the town administrator position. So I'll be taking over that role for the town of Jericho. We're looking at a number of connectivity possibilities within the town of Jericho and looking forward to finding ways to connect to the other towns, the mob trail systems and or other venues. So this is a really great opportunity for us. That's it. Oh, I have to call on somebody. Okay, I'll call on Dana Farr.
You're muted.
Of course, right? Thank you. My name is Dana Farr, and I'm on the South Burlington Bike and Ped Committee, along with my fellow member, Nick Anderson. And our group has been working a lot toward connectivity. So I'm glad to hear that that was something you were looking at too. And Nick, with that introduction, you can go next.
You already did it. It's great. Nick Anderson, on the South Burlington Bike Ped Committee too as the clerk, and been there for a few years, been in South Burlington for 14 years now. So definitely always looking for opportunities to connect to other communities. And I'll throw it over to Bill Reagan.
Thanks, Nick. My name is Bill Regan. I'm chair of the Charlotte Trails Committee.
I've also done some volunteer and some paid work for Local Motion. So I know Jonathan and Nick through that venue as well. We are busy trying to build out an internal network of trails in Charlotte, which has its own challenges. But I'm in contact with all the trails committees in our neighboring jurisdictions, and we all will agree that it would be best if we could construct our trails in a way that align with each other and we have that connectivity and create a regional network. But that for us is a longer term goal, considering the relatively slow progress we make on just building trails within the town. And with that, I'll throw it to Zoe.
Thank you. I'm Zoe Richards, and I direct the Burlington Wildways Partnership, which is a partnership between some of the major public-facing landowners in the city of Burlington, which is the Winooski Valley Park District, Burlington Parks Rec and Waterfront, Intervale Center, and Rock Point. And we're, I think, similar to what Bill was talking about, we're working at trying to both look collectively at conservation in Burlington. We're looking towards equitable access, and also not as much building out a trail network, but actually connecting the one we have, getting rid of trails we don't want, putting trails where they should be, making sure that they're accessible and you can get from point A to point B. Just trying to get past the sort of, which I'm sure many of you are struggling with too, like putting trails where they should be, allowing people to get where they want to go, and not having it be defined by ownership as much. And we're really working towards what are some of the barriers to access for lots of people within our own community. And I also am the chair of the Burlington Conservation Board. And I will, maybe I'll try Steve Dowd again.
I don't know if you can see me. I'm Steve Dowd. I'm a member of the Essex Conservation and Trails Committee. So I'm happy to join my fellow members today. I think it would be great if Essex could be more connected to the networks around us. So I'm ready to dedicate some time to helping that. Thank you. I don't know who else hasn't spoken.
We can go to, how about Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Johnson. I live in Shelburne and I'm a member of the Village Pedestrian Safety Group. I'm hearing a lot about trails and biking here, but I think our group is primarily concerned with safe passage for pedestrians on sidewalks within the village of Shelburne. Thanks. And I'll turn it over to Ann Powell.
Good morning. Hi, Barb. I am also a member of the Shelburne Pedestrian Safety Group, along with Barb. I know we have at least one or more other members on here, and Barb summed it up pretty well. We tend more toward, obviously, pedestrian safety, although biking is also very important to us. And Susan Grasso, I think, is on here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Grasso. I'm also a member of the Shelburne Village Pedestrian Safety Group, and I'm also active in the Shelburne Bike and Pedestrian Paths Committee, though not a formal member of that committee. But I think everyone's pretty much summed up the interest that I have and the reasons that I'm here. Shelburne has been involved in a connectivity study. And so that's really important to me throughout the entire town to think about how we connect internally as well as to our neighboring destinations. So thank you. And I will pass it on to, I think Ted is here.
Yeah, that's right. Ted Grozier, Shelburne Bike and Pedestrian Paths Committee, current chair. And who hasn't spoken? Greg, have we heard from you?
No, you haven't heard from me yet. Greg Hostetler. I'm representing the Burlington Walk Bike Council, where we work with Burlington DPW to give input on making Burlington a safer place to walk and bike. And I don't think we've heard from Abby yet. So Abby, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name's Abby Blything. I'm on the Winooski Planning Commission. We had a Winooski Bicycle Coalition for a hot second, but it is no longer. However, our our work on the planning commission really is about getting better walkability, bikeability within the city and better connections into the neighboring jurisdictions. And then I'm also effectively the bike ped coordinator for the University of Vermont. So work with Greg and other partners in Burlington. And then before that was working on the Safe Routes to School program in many of the towns here, trying to connect kids safely to school on foot and bike. So glad to be here. Thanks. I'm not sure, did Annie go? Annie Powell, or who still needs to go?
Hi, this is Susan Brzee. I think I still need to go. I am the chair of the Planning Commission in Jericho, and our town, we have a bike ped plan, and we have a trails committee, and we are looking at how to take our plans from want to have, nice to have, to have to have. So we're looking at the town plan and our zoning regulations and potentially the adoption of an official map so that we have a little bit more money and regulatory strength behind the plan. I'm not sure who has not yet gone.
Yeah, maybe I can call it.
Oh,
I can call the rest one. Let's go to let's go to you, John.
I was going to jump in and piggyback on Susan again, being from the town of Jericho. My name is John Abbott. I'm the new town administrator in Jericho, and as Steve had said, had spent a number of years as chair of the Trails Committee. Yeah, we're really looking forward to forwarding both recreational trail connectivity and, as Susan said, addressing the imperative for multimodal bike pedestrian transportation through the village centers in our town.
Super. Let's go to Greg Western.
Hello, all. I'm Greg Western from the Cross Vermont Trail Association, and we work the length of the Winooski River and then the Wells River down to go, from the Lake Champlain to the Connecticut. And in some places we are building new trails, especially in smaller towns where we're able to take the lead. And in Chittenden County, obviously we're not, because all of you guys are doing all so much awesome stuff. But I just wanted to show the flag and just say Cross Vermont Trail Association definitely wants to work together with all the communities to promote the connections that are there, or the idea of future connections. And we're definitely, the last time we updated our map and route in Chittenden County was 14 years ago. So I think a lot is different now. And so we just want to resume, to take another round and learn what's going on and be a part of supporting it.
Thank you, Greg. Let's go to Barrett.
And I'm Barrett Grimm. I am co-chair of the Huntington Conservation Commission. I'm representing a few committees from our town today. We have long dreamed of a foot/bike path connecting our villages. So we're hoping to learn more today.
Great. I believe that is anyone. Did we miss anybody? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you all.
Yeah, great. Great to hear from everybody. Thank you for joining. We've got, representation from a lot of towns. That's wonderful. As I mentioned, I just have a handful of slides just to give some background on our current work with the active transportation plan, sort of set the stage for the conversation today. So bear with me while I hit all the buttons. Okay, great. So we are going to skip all of these slides because we've seen them already. This is our agenda for today. Look at that. We're already on number 2. Wonderful. And then we'll get through these. I believe Jonathan shared this with you previously. Okay, so
are folks seeing Brian's screen?
No.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it,
right.
Brian.
Let's try it again.
There we go.
Okay. Awesome. So the RPC back in the day was the Chittenden County Metropolitan Planning Organization. When ICE-T was passed in the 90s, the first federal transportation funding bill, it said, hey, MPOs, you need to create a walk bike plan for your region. So in 1993, we created the first active transportation plan. Generally, every 5 years or so, these are updated. I think in the first 10 years, it was 93, 03, 08, 13, 17, and now here we are. So that's a federal requirement of ours, but as an entity, we recognize that safe walking and biking is part of a critical transportation system. So we're not just focused on highways, although that's how it used to be. It's no longer that way. All of the modes are important to us. We try to advance all of those as demonstrated by our partnerships with you all, Locomotion, Green Mountain Transit, and so on. The active transportation plan is a higher level plan. We're not focused on sort of those internal within the town connections that you are focused on, which is great. We're trying to help understand what are the regional connections to help people get between communities. And it also provides a good framework for when you are chasing those grant dollars, you can point to the regional plan and say, look, this is identified at the regional level as an important connection. It helps strengthen your case. When you point to your town plan, you can also point to the regional plan in that regard. We all know the benefits of walking and biking. That's why we all do the work that we do. It supports all of these different healthy initiatives, climate goals, the financial impacts, not only personally, but locally, improves access and mobility for those who need it most. So lots of reasons why we're doing this. With your help, of course. Everything the RPC does is public. And so we will definitely come back to you with some asking for your feedback and input, much like we are today. For the active transportation plan, we do have an advisory committee. We've got sort of the people you might expect, such as Jonathan from Locomotion, Green Mountain Transit. We've got John from Jericho representing sort of the rural towns. We've got Winooski as an urban sort of town. We have someone from the Old Spokes Home has a Transportation Equity Coalition, so we have a representative from there. Probably about a dozen people representing different voices and populations at the table, which is always great to have. We are partnering with a consultant called Tool Design. They are nationally, internationally known for their walking and biking planning efforts. They also completed the 2017 plan. We have a little bit different team this year, but we are drawing on the 27 plan, but doing a different type of analysis this go around. Okay. The committee will meet about 4 times, and it generally aligns with the key deliverables, key tasks for this. I'll go into that in a minute, but they're going to meet generally, as you see, we just kicked off last week with them, so we'll meet again in June. The consultant team has done sort of some background material review. They've looked at the long range plan, which is called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. They've looked at the 2017 plan, of course. UVM Transportation Research Center did an in-depth sort of progress report of the 2017 plan to see what's been completed so far, and also offer some suggestions on how to improve that process. So Greg from the TRC is on the committee as well, which would be a great addition for us. And so here are these sort of 4 key tasks on which the committee will meet. So again, we'd have the kickoff. We're doing 4 different types of analysis. Doing a bicycle network analysis, which is looking at if we can it will have a map of all the facilities, and it will do some different scenarios about connecting different areas together and what that will look like, the impacts that would have on people choosing to walk or bike. One of those scenarios will be an equity-based scenario based on demographic data that we can pull. And you'll see that in equity analysis as a part of that. So, and that will be a both quantitative, drawing on the census data, but it will also be qualitative. We will be meeting with different individuals and groups representing diverse populations to hear their stories how they use walking and biking as transportation, what are the barriers for them, some of the historical aspects on how transportation planning has impacted their communities. The trip potential analysis will draw on the bicycle network analysis. And this is sort of where the level of traffic stress comes in. There's that 4-scale grade of that. So determining the level of comfort for people choosing to walk or bike on different roadways. And then some of you know, a couple years ago, I was trying to sort of push forward on some of these off-road connections. Sometimes the planning and construction can take a while for sidewalks and on-road bike lanes and so on. We know that people are using off-road paths to connect different neighborhoods together to get to where they want to go. And so I was really interested in how we can bring those forward as a little bit more formalized connections. So we're folding that into the active transportation plan. Just sort of again, higher level overview, not looking at private property impacts or do we need to contact different landowners, but just like, oh, what would it look like if we went from A to B? What makes sense there? Does it work? Then again, the team will come back with some different recommendations and then a prioritization process for the committee to react to. And again, there's different stages throughout this that we will come to groups like you and ask for your help and support in spreading the word for them. In terms of outreach, we are scheduling sort of 2 formal listening sessions, if you will, in April, where we'll go to different groups and again, just sit down and talk with them and hear their feedback on what's working, what's not, what they'd like to see. I welcome your input on those. We're just starting to plan those, but if you have groups or people that you think that we should reach out to, please let me know. I spoke with John, the new director at Old Spokes Home yesterday about us meeting with their Transportation Equity Coalition. So that group can serve as sort of a focus group for us, which will be really great to hear. Personally, I'm available to make myself, to meet with different people or have phone calls or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to necessarily be sort of a formal Zoom call or around the table thing. And then if there's different meetings, if you've got committees that are meeting, if you want me to pop in and share some information, I'm happy to do that too. Or if you know of other events that we should be present at, by all means, please let me know. Okay, and that gets us, that's me talking. I'll ask Jonathan at this point, did I miss anything that you'd like to cover as a committee member?
I think that was good. I imagine that one question folks might have here is, how has the active transportation plan in the past integrated, trails or trail corridors, and do you see those being built into this next plan?
In the past, it's really been the road corridor connections, right? The traditional striped bike lanes. Now we're, buffered and protected bike lanes. Although the active transportation plan doesn't get too prescriptive, it's just like we should have a facility here. And then the next step is to do a scoping study, which really looks at the different alternatives. Shared use paths, meaning separate but paved from a roadway, those have been included. Again, not too prescriptive, but this will be the first time that we're really looking at potential off-road connections. And I've tried to find other examples of that around the country. It's sort of new when an MPO uses federal planning dollars. Federal Highways says you can only do this planning work and it has to follow these guidelines. If it had, recreational is not in their lingo, it's Federal Highway Administration. But again, we're advanced here. We're progressive. We like to push back on federal highways and say, look, you've got livability in all of your lingo. And so this is important. Things can serve both purposes, recreation and transportation. And I think we're there. We have their support. But again, it's pretty new for us. And, at that regional level, is there a way that those off-road paths, whether or not they become paved and more formal in the future, how does that create sort of a more connected regional system that's not just on Route 2 or 15 or 7, but connecting these other networks through towns that might be a little more enjoyable than traffic. So thanks for that. I will pause and open it up in case anyone has any questions about the process or the previous ATP. We do have, it's available online. I can share links with those very easy for you, or you probably already have those.
Can I give a comment, Brian?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really like this idea of using off-road trails for transportation to connect communities. And I guess my suggestion would be to make sure that that they're marked so that the wayfinding is there, so that people, when they see a trail, they know where it goes. It might be helpful to know how far it is to get somewhere on that trail. And of course, to map these things out, to have maps available online and maybe even in print. Just so that, especially when they're new, so that people know that they're there and how to use them. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, I guess from my planner seat, I'll look to you all when we sort of have that vision, and then it comes to you to make that vision happen. Then, that wayfinding and signage and so on would be sort of that design construction piece. But yes, people need to know where they're going. Absolutely.
Brian, I wanted to piggyback on that last comment.
Sure.
Again, I'm from Shelburne. We're starting to have these conversations, or I'm starting to get involved with them. We do have many locations where people are walking on informal paths on private property, where property owners have been tolerant, but concern about these paths being overused or over advertised, or so I don't know if that's the kind of thing that you're looking to think about, because they can be, like you're saying, really important places for connectivity within a town. So how you move it from something that's informally used to something that's accepted and more publicly available. Is that the kind of thing that you're looking to, broaden the regional plan to consider connectivity opportunities in those areas?
I think at this stage, it would be pretty high level, with some of the local projects in Shelburne and other towns where we're starting to incorporate potential off-road connections as a part of a comprehensive walking and biking plan. Like you say, locally, there might be handshake agreements where landowners will allow people to use it, but they don't want any lines on a map. They don't want it advertised, so we want to respect that. So this is very high level, just looking at what are the potential connections, but not wanting to have any concerns from private landowners about, wait, someone's saying that they're going to put a trail on my property. That's not what we're saying.
How do you balance that? How do you think about sort of putting that idea out there without, so you're not thinking about putting actual lines, just kind of putting the idea out there in this round of the plan? And the other thing I want to ask about, because something that's come up in our conversations, is the fact that Vermont is one of the few places, as far as I understand, in the country that actually sort of has this very old, I think within our Constitution, that people are presumed to have the right to access private property. This is really more for hunting purposes. And that if landowners don't want, people to use their properties, they need to post it. Whereas in a lot of states, it's the other way around. And I'm wondering if has been any thought about how we might take that longstanding right, and that, indirect protection of the sort of right to roam. If there's been any thought at a very high level to think about transferring that to kind of walkability within the state. That's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
Vermont is so unusual in that way. And I didn't know if there were any conversations about trying to link that to, supporting and sustaining the kind of walkable culture we already have.
Yeah, I don't think that's one of the policies that as an organization that we've sort of endeavored to push one way or the other. I know that some of the trail groups have worked with the state to come up with the landowner liability, to really remove that from the landowner. But I think it's important for us to capture in the notes and consider as one of those other policies that could have an impact down the road. I'll say it's making me think of sort of the Act 250, and with the trail development, that's been a barrier to some of the trails in other areas. So again, it's nothing that we as an organization have really worked on, but I acknowledge that other groups, including some of you, are probably at that point where it's impacting your ability to get things done. So it's important for us to note.
Yeah, and I would think any kind of, other examples from other communities, models, how you engage private landowners in this conversation, before a property is being developed, for example, to have conversations around protecting some of the informal trails that already exist in communities. I think anything like that would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
To all
Thank
these
you.
conversations that are happening in Shelburne.
Great.
I'm
sure.
sorry. Just to follow up on that, is there any mechanism for conservation easements for trails like there is for agriculture? Are you following me? Where a property owner might get a tax break for not developing land, for having it set aside for agriculture, is there, or for conservation, is there something similar that could be used for setting aside an informal right-of-way on private property for public use for a trail?
I'd actually ask some of the people on the call that might have some direct experience with that to respond. I want to say yes, but I don't have that specific experience. Anyone encountered that? Susan?
Not that we've had experience with it, but this is kind of the driver behind our effort to develop an official map. Is our understanding is that the official map would give the town the ability to negotiate with individual landowners when the land comes up for a development application. And the official map would give the town, if the location is identified as a key connection, it would give us the ability to either acquire an easement or acquire the property at fair market value. So of course, there's a lot of unknowns in that, whether or not the town would come up with the money at the time, and whether or not the landowner would be willing and able, I guess, to negotiate an easement as opposed to actual acquisition. But we don't yet know. We're just starting this project now, so we don't know the answers to a lot of the questions, but we're struggling with the concept of like, how do you compensate the landowner so that their development doesn't stand in the way of continuing the network. And we have had recent development that has done exactly what you're talking about, eliminated informal pathways. We've also had development applications where our DRB has said, this is identified as a key connection. We would, as a condition of approval, we require an easement to the town, and the applicant appealed that decision, and environmental court withheld it because there wasn't compensation. So that's what we're trying to do right now, is learn about how to tie the regulatory structure of an official map with the money to either purchase the land, the portion of the land that can facilitate the network, or purchase the easement. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know how hard it's going to be. I don't know if our town is going to ultimately adopt any sort of an official map. We might come against all sorts of landowner resistance, but at least that's what we're setting out to learn about trying to do.
Great, thanks for sharing. Darren.
Yeah, Essex has had a little bit of experience with this. We have trail and non-active transportation maps in our town plan that we use in a development review process, like Susan mentioned. And typically, it's when a subdivision comes in, we require that easement, an easement for wherever the trail goes. It's a lot easier to do that for bike paths because those are along an existing street typically, as opposed to a informal trail or an off-road trail, because that typically cuts through a place where someone wants to develop. So that's been our challenge. In terms of compensation, it is an important consideration, and one of our strategies has been to establish a conservation reserve fund, which can also be used for trail easement acquisition in addition to conservation and agricultural easements. And we haven't used it yet. It's only a few years old, but it is there, and that is something we could bring to bear in a negotiation. But the other challenge has been keeping our maps updated, because I think when they were created, they weren't necessarily scoped out with precision and with the consideration for what was practical, both from where the trail leads and what the development scheme might be. So typically, one thing that's happened is in an area where there is an existing trail and a development comes through and wants to, develop in that, and where that trail is, we ask them to relocate the trail. So it doesn't have to be in the same specific location, but as long as the connection is maintained, can be a more a better compromise than having to prevent or significantly alter the private landowners' development plans. Oh, and then one more thing. As far as I know, I don't think there's any tax incentive like land conservation from an Act 250 or tax perspective, except for the value of that trail easement, which can be pretty minimal. But one thing you can do is offer incentives for development to offer those easements as a way of getting something else in their review process, like higher density or other, flexibility from your regulations.
Great, thank you, Darren. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Darren just said what I can flesh out that as well. That's the specific question a little bit back was, is there a tax break to allow public use of land for trails similar to current use for agriculture or forestry? The answer is no, but it's been discussed. I think it was discussed this year in the legislature about current use style tax breaks for allowing public use of land. But it currently is not the case. So just like the other folks have said, any money people get to allow public use would be a one-time payment up front, for an easement or something like that.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So the slide I had up it really reflects sort of, better understanding the local priorities in your communities and your groups. Jonathan had shared a survey a couple weeks ago asking these similar questions. So thank you to those of you who responded and provided some nice insight into that. The question really is, what do you think it would take to get more people walking and biking in your community specifically, and also Chittenden County more broadly? So I'll open that question up to you. You can throw things in the chat. We'll copy the chat afterward if you prefer to do that, or we can open it up. And what I'll do is I'll share the vision statement from the 27 active transportation plan. I'll put that in there. It's a little bit long, but you might see some words that that speak to you. So I'll put that in there. But again, I'll open it up for people to talk about what would it take to get more people walking and biking.
This is Steve Schwartz. Can I say something?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm going to try to answer both your questions. In relation to Jericho in particular, we're kind of at the outreaches of Chittenden County, and the old phrase, you can't get there from here, kind of applies not only within the town of Jericho, but trying to connect to even the nearest town westward, which would be Essex. You know, we're far enough that trying to get that interconnectivity between the two towns is a big challenge without impacting other private lands. And trying to get folks to understand that nobody wants to do a land grab is hard to do. So we've been faced with a couple challenges, certainly within the town of Jericho, where we have 3 common areas. We'll call it the Corners, Riverside, and Jericho Center. And even just connecting those 3 within the town has been a very serious challenge for us. So we're working through that, but it's a slow process. So trying to get something to connect to even Essex that makes sense is equally a challenge. In my humble opinion, you know, doing the striped asphalt along Route 15 that is off the road would be ideal, but you'd be cutting through a number of people's yards. So just solely speaking for the town of Jericho, we have a lot of challenges that I think this organization could really help to tackle.
Great, thank you for that comment. Darren, go ahead.
Thanks. And I want to follow on to something Steve said about connecting, these neighboring communities, especially when you start to get more rural. The challenge for us has been working on state highways and figuring out, okay, how do we make those connections when the only established one is along a state route that we don't control. The only solution we've kind of come up with is, again, getting those easements along the state routes that the town owns and could, use in creating a multi-use path, because the state doesn't seem to have a good success with expanding, the shoulder or bike lane along those routes. Even when they did River Road 117, there were limited places where they could even expand and add bike capacity because there's just narrow areas. So trying to figure out from a regional level how to get those projects done would be something that we can't do at a local level as easily, and that's something we would look for help with. And then at the local level internally, we're trying to figure out how to get people from A to B, particularly families and children, especially trying to get to school. We've got some outlying areas, and that's a land use and a overall planning issue that we're sort of trying to fix after the fact. But that's the policy there seems to be doing those off-road connections as much as possible, because that seems to be what people want to use, as opposed to navigating through the street networks, which aren't always the most efficient and aren't always safe.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I know VTrans is trying a little bit harder, it seems, to work on their policies to, they did their own on-road bike plan a few years ago and are trying to push on that. I know some of the towns in the county are really pushing with them to have wider shoulders. That may be the only opportunity in a town to connect places together. So I would encourage you to work with your select boards, your representatives, as an avenue to try to get VTrans to work in your community. But I hear you, Darren, in the role that the RPC can play with that in our relationship with the state too, just to recognize, all right, some state highways are connecting these village centers, so we need to do better.
Maybe I could just throw one more thing that might be different than what some other folks have been sort of chewing on in terms of getting people out. In Burlington, something that's come up that's kind of a big issue are off-leash dogs. and that there are folks who have different levels of comfort, especially in Burlington, very true of Winooski, where we have immigrant communities, many of whom haven't grown up in a culture where dogs are like pets or friendly or something that they view favorably. And those are that's some pretty big barriers for folks getting into. This isn't roads, but I just thought I'd throw this perspective in. But trails, it's a big issue. Especially we did some outreach work with high school students, and that really came up very high in Burlington. Also, another thing that came out of that work with high school students was that, especially in immigrant communities, folks don't, the stuff that we all think of as really making it obvious as to where something is public, like there's just all these cues like trail markers and stuff like that, that if you've grown up in the United States and been outside, that cues you like, oh, that's a trail, I see a blaze. That's not true for everyone. They can't tell what's public and what's not. So I'll just throw that out there. It was very interesting and eye-opening for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think we do need to keep those things in mind that we may not be aware of. And the more that we talk to different people, it helps us plan better. So thank you for that. Jonathan, I'm keeping an eye on time over here, and I wonder if we want to move on to the map and move towards that discussion. We created a map pretty quickly as a tool to get your feedback on some of the issues that you're aware of in terms of barriers, also some of the connections that you'd like to see. Again, not trying to get this perfect right now. If you looked closely at the map, you probably found some things that raised your eyebrow that may or may not seem correct, but the intent was really like, here's something to really capture your feedback as we move forward and that we can share with the consultant about. Here's some ideas at the local level that we want to pay attention to. So Jonathan, how best do you want to move forward with this part?
Yeah, I can pull up the map on my screen and maybe we can just talk through a little bit about it. There, we didn't give a ton of time for folks to give input on the map. So Brian, hopefully it's something we can keep open for a little while longer.
Yeah, currently no plans to close it. I think at some point we'll want to, and we didn't really develop it for it to be like a public facing tool. It was really like, oh, here's this group we're getting together. Let's get their feedback with it. We'll have other opportunities for the broader public to provide input on some sort of tool, such as a map. So let's keep the map within the group for now. We'll keep it open for another week or two. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I'll pull it up. I'll look at some of the connections and barriers that have been put on the map. And then, I think as we keep going through the rest of this conversation, just, be thinking about what things might be going on in your community that you want to put on the map that you think are important for us to know about. So just a second here. All right, are folks seeing that map now?
Yes.
Very good, cool. So I'm not sure if folks have spent, a whole lot of time on this, so I'll just give a quick overview. This map has a lot of different layers. They're all basically turned off right now, but you can turn on, the view to see bike lanes, multi-use paths, all these different things. I think it's a little easier to maybe have those turned off if you're looking at just it can be a lot. But basically, what we're really hoping you can tell us about are what are the possible barriers around your community to walking and biking, and what are some connections that you might like to see that you think would be good to maybe cut through a forest area or an existing connection that folks might not know about, being sensitive to if that is a private connection, maybe that's not something you want to put on the map. Adam, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I looked at this map and was going to provide some input, and I was pleased to see that several of the things I wanted to provide input on already had some lines on the map. One of which being like from Swift Street connecting over to the bike path that goes past UVM. There's, for a lot of people, they like to recreate along Spear Street, and there's sort of like this disjointed rec path between Swift and like the university. But I did notice on the map that there's like a proposed like yellow dotted line there. And so my question was just, where are those sort of proposed routes? Like if you go to the layers, like where did those come from? Is that like, and so like what level are those actually being sort of planned and pursued?
Yeah. So there, as Brian said, there are some inaccuracies in this map that are kind of getting worked out, and it's not super easy to know what level each element on the map is at in terms of the planning that's been undertaken for that specific piece of infrastructure. Brian, do you want to speak a little bit about the maps that are going to come out of the ATP process?
Sure. So the layers that are underlying this map, it's I don't want to say it's a hodgepodge of different facilities, but sometimes, when we say it might be a planned or proposed, it could be something that maybe our agency has done a scoping project for, and it's a plan, right? So we want, a bike lane along this road or a sidewalk connection. But in other instances, it might be, we know in a certain community, a connection, I'll think of along 289, for example. We know that that's important for communities. It hasn't really been studied, like there's no plans for it, conceptual plans for it. But it's a linkage that is important, so it could be considered, planned. So there's different degrees of being planned or proposed. It might be, we know that it's important locally, or the community has shared with us that they'd like to look at that at some point.
And Brian, can I ask a quick follow-on? There are a couple of locations I've seen that we've done scoping studies for, but aren't on this map. Should we make sure that those get put in there, or is that something you're already working on?
If it's quick and easy for you to share, that's great. Again, Pam in our office just quickly created this, I'll say as a favor, last minute. So it's imperfect and it's easy to sort of zoom in and find consistencies in there. So we'll be updating this based on what we know more currently. And I will point out that someone else who was exploring the map, found, I don't know, one of the layers, it looked like it was, there wasn't a facility. So one of the layers we have that isn't identified, it got lumped in with bike facilities, is sort of a common route, but not designated. So it might be a corridor where we know that a lot of people are using it, but it doesn't have a shared use path or a striped bike lane, but we know that it's commonly used. So it just got lumped in there too.
Yeah. So I think, there are some tricky aspects to this map in terms of what's planned and what's on the ground. What we're really hoping you folks can contribute is sort of that local perspective of connections that might exist or that you think might be necessary, and just using that local knowledge in terms of what you know is on the ground and what you'd like to see on the ground. So just an example, I had added as an example this connection from North Ave over to the Burlington Beltline. It's something that's been discussed, but not, there's been no planning done to sort of advance that. And I know someone else had added this connection across the Winooski River, which is another, a bridge that's been discussed, which I think is an awesome idea. And then you start to see there's this whole east-west corridor where, it's a really long way around to get from the New North End to Winooski or vice versa. By bike, but if there was a more efficient connection there, you'd be connecting multiple rec paths and providing that really nice east-west connectivity between two communities. So that's an example of how you start to see these sort of corridors emerge when you get more points on the map and people sort of share their local knowledge. That's really what we're looking for. And then also these arrows are barriers. So places where you think there's a difficult intersection or a spot that feels really uncomfortable when you're biking or walking, you can drop that down on the map. If you think it's something really obvious, a state route, I wouldn't worry about that so much. But if it's a barrier that maybe a little more subtle that exists in your local community, I think that would be a great thing to highlight. Brian, was there anything else you wanted to cover with this map?
Should I
Not
just,
specific. Yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
I just wanted to say that I put that arrow about the bridge, and I don't want to imply that that's the correct location for it. I just made up a location, but you know, the point stands. It's not an investigated, like that's the perfect spot for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're definitely considering these high level sort of corridor level recommendations. So don't worry about getting it perfect.
Great, thank you. I don't have the expertise on where it should go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll say, you know, the bridge across the Winooski River connecting Burlington and Winooski, we're working with South Burlington and Burlington to write a federal grant. They have the RAISE program. So they're currently working on a federal grant for that bridge, which would then include some much better walking and biking facilities. So, you know, South Burlington got a grant for the walk bike bridge over the interstate. Fantastic. I mean, that never happens. We finally get one of these barriers addressed. So this is another key barrier. So I just wanted to let people know that that's grant applications in progress. John.
Yeah, I wanted to just I wanted to engage the conversation about the transportation to trails idea too. For those of us in more rural communities, the idea of people who want to use recreational trails in adjacent towns or come out and mountain bike in Cochrane's or areas that could be potentially accessible along bus lines is I think a really exciting proposition. You know, you know, bike pedestrian culture being fundamental to conversation around climate change, I think really has some incredible possibility in that regard as we try to get people coming from Burlington or other more densely populated parts of the county out to recreate and explore, and not having to jump in a car at all is a great goal to keep in mind. And Brian, you've been really forward thinking about the idea of transportation to trails, which is, I think, an excellent thing to keep in mind as we move ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, not just thinking about connection between recreation destinations and between origins and recreation destinations, but also between, yeah, our public transportation system and destinations. Yeah, thanks, John.
Trains to trails, possibly.
Yeah, sure. All right, should I close up this map, Brian, and we will move on to the next bit of our conversation?
Yeah, that sounds great, Nick. You know, like I said, we'll keep this open for a while, so don't feel rushed to do something today. Great. You know, the next, I don't need to share my screen for this, but moving on to the next discussion point is really helping Jonathan and I understand the needs of your groups locally. You know, what support can we help you with? What role can Local Motion or the Regional Planning Commission play in supporting your work, whether it's locally in your community or helping to connect you with other communities? And we thought this type of meeting would be a great sort of first step or opportunity, not only for us to hear from you, but to connect y'all with each other. I assume you meet sometimes, but probably not all the time. So again, looking to your feedback on how we can best support your work. I've got John and then Susan.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand down from last time.
Then I'll jump in. Brian, one thing I've been thinking about is if there's any kind of guidance or connections with other communities to think more about the connection between active transportation and land use planning. So thinking about how we can be more proactive about ensuring that development is happening in ways that allow it, make it easier for people to accomplish their daily tasks through walking and biking. So I'm just curious if what kind of conversations that you're having about that connection, and what kind of strategies or learning, that you can provide the local communities about how we navigate that within our own towns.
I think, earlier someone mentioned the official map, and that is a tool that a community can use to help plan those corridor connections in the future. We're working on a number of those with some communities right now. South Burlington has one, Williston has one. We're working in Jericho, currently Essex. So it is one of those tools that can help a town sort of plan that network, whether it's roads or utility corridors or trail corridors as well.
So by having the network kind of envisioned, that will help drive development decisions to, you know what I mean? Like where's the lever to help push development so that it happens in ways that make it easier for, like I was saying, make it easier for people to walk and bike. And I guess I'm trying to understand, are you saying that if we get the network kind of envisioned and on paper, that will naturally motivate development to happen in that kind of pattern? That question of development lead and then transportation follows, or should transportation lead and then somehow incentivize development to follow in patterns that, that encourage more walking and biking for all of the benefits that you've talked about earlier?
Yeah, there's lots of levers that drive development in many different ways, some of which we can help a little, some, and others that we just can't contend with. The official map is, as I mentioned, is a tool that can help lay the groundwork. So when a development is being considered, the town officials can say, well, we've got this, so we need to figure out how we're going to make it work within your proposal. Zoning changes are another, having your zoning reflect what the community wants to look like in the future. I just blanked on another one, but we've talked about some towns have comprehensive walking and biking plans. So while that may not direct development one way or the other, it is an adopted document by officials that reflect the vision the community wants to have. To a lesser extent, but similarly, the regional active transportation plan, right? If those are in alignment at the local level and regional level, you can say this is important to us, it's adopted. And I feel like looking at the names of people in the different communities you represent, I think you've had this experience. I will say there's a project we worked on in Jericho, the old sawmill property, sort of in the heart of one of in Underhill Flats. The town at the time wanted to sort of think about the transportation network. At first, this was an undeveloped piece of land. So if they had planned what the potential road network could look like, then that would direct the potential development and build out of that, rather than having different pieces of that get buildings put on and then you just figure out how you're going to get between. So that's an example in Jericho, but if others have comments, or we can come back with more information about that as well.
I'll chime in really.
Yeah, sorry, form-based codes, that's another land use planning tool that towns are adopting that helps guide sort of what the development looks like, and it provides that more walkable feeling in places, and that's becoming more common in the planning world. So anyway, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I just wanted to say I think it's essential to think about land use as well when you want to have your place be more walkable and bikeable. It's a bit of a tricky thing to know how far as a person or professional focused on transportation, advocacy, or walking and biking, which is sort of my role. How far into that land use area do I push? I'm thinking, for example, in Burlington, Jack Hansen has worked a lot on getting parking minimums changed and removed throughout the city, and that's an example, I think, of where as transportation advocates, we have a role to play in the land use in our communities. I think local motion. I think we can maybe do some events to talk about what that process has looked like in Burlington to educate folks in different communities about how that work goes and some best practices. So maybe that's something I can look at doing.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess the issue that we have in Burlington is that all of our space that we would like to have for safer walking and biking is we're competing with automobile use, with travel lanes and car storage, and you're well aware that this demand for parking spaces for travel lanes is a real obstacle, and I know that you're already working with Burlington on transportation demand management, and so I guess just wanted to say thank you for your help there, and that really is, I think, our big obstacle in a developed city like Burlington.
Yeah, thank you for that. Right, when we talk about land use, we are talking about use of public spaces, how we use our land. Great, Barbara.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to comment about providing assistance for students walking to school. And I know that Local Motion has a day once a year, I think, the Walk to School Day, but I'd be an advocate for expanding that to once a month. I know in Shelburne, we have a lot of challenge with drivers backing up at the school and traffic backing up near the school in the morning and in the afternoon. And that prompts me to think about some kind of a remote drop-off spot where some adults would meet the parents and walk the kids to school from there. Just not sure where Local Motion stands on helping students walk to school or bike.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So we do have we have a lot of school programs. We have a Safe Routes to School program that is funded through the state. And through that program, we provide a ton of assistance to schools to help them set up things like remote drop-off areas to coordinate walk to school days. We have our Bike Smart program that basically delivers trailers full of kids' bikes to elementary and middle schools so that kids can learn how to bike safely. So we have a ton of supports for schools, and if there's a school in your community that is maybe not connected with us, I'd love to know about that. We are working with a lot of schools throughout the county, but there are certainly some that, for various reasons, maybe they haven't had the capacity recently to take on some of this work, or we just haven't made the connection. So let's be in touch and make sure that we're corresponding with those folks at your community schools.
Great, thanks.
Nick, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that South Burlington has kind of definitely used the official map as a very effective planning tool. An example of that is Swift Street extension going across to Heinsberg Road. We've had that kind of written on a plan for a long time, and at the time it was a farm field and a single family house that just sold, and it's going to probably be like 400 houses, but there's this perfect line on a map, and it might not be an accurate line, but it's good enough to signal to the developers that this is an expectation, that there's going to be a connection through here. And so it does help those, anytime something actually happens with that land, that there's a trigger of like, okay, we need to start thinking about this. There's lots of other conversations as well, but I think the official map in South Burlington has done a really great job of providing all of those different path networks that we've got. And another example of that, right now we're doing an official plan amendment for right beside the I-89 bridge for the pedestrian connection, but we've actually slapped a line on the map that goes through the middle of the Staples Plaza building. It doesn't say we got to build a path there, but it indicates to the property owner that at some future time, this would be a really great path. And, maybe the building gets demolished in 20 years, but it's been signified that this is an important connection. So I think, Brian, your work on trails or trail splitation kind of thing, again, doesn't really have to look at what's there right now, but just what's what's desirable in the next 50 years, because things change all the time.
Yeah, thanks for that. Good point. Barrett, go ahead.
It's the whole idea of walking to school kind of encapsulates a great many of the issues that we're facing, because we have families that want to walk to school, but they would be doing so at the same time as the morning commute, and it's all funneling onto the same busy road. We have landowners who are willing to let people cross their property on that walk, but they don't want it advertised, and they don't want to grant an easement because there's no real incentive for them to do so. And so we can't really spread the word that you could use this alternative. But it all comes together. How do you get people to allow paths on their private property? And that is the biggest challenge that we face.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. Anyone else? And you're welcome. We don't have to. If you think of something else, you can always be in touch with Jonathan and I outside of the meeting, of course. Bill, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo that point. Yeah, we're in a rural community, so it's a little different, but our biggest obstacle is getting easements. And I even had conversations with landowners who say they love trails, they want more trails, they use the trails all the time, but sort of over their dead bodies, will they let a trail through their property? So we have that NIMBYism thing, which I imagine lots of folks face. But I think part of our struggle is relating back to a previous part of the conversation was there are a few incentives that we can offer besides our undying gratitude to property owners to give up some control of their land.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd like to just say one more thing about that. I know I mentioned earlier about this idea of a sort of right to roam, building that concept in Vermont. And one of the reasons why this has been on my mind is because I recently did a walk around Shelburne and came across I was trying to explore, potential connectivity between different important assets in Shelburne. And I came across a large property which was posted, but the sign said, "You are welcome here." And it was so refreshing to have a landowner post a sign that said, "You are welcome here," just make sure that you're, not doing any damage to the property and pick up after your dog, that kind of thing. And it was just very refreshing. And that kind of got me thinking. And I have neighbors who have expressed that sentiment to me. And it made me wonder how many people might be out there who might share that philosophy, and whether there was an opportunity to kind of look at a pilot program or a set of guidelines where you might ask people to, kind of be a part of that kind of, list of landowners who might have that kind of feeling, and then maybe provide them with some support if they were to actually open up their property. So I know it's kind of a crazy idea, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that was an experience I had in Shelburne.
Thanks, Susan. I talked to someone who has a short path, and his comment was people are concerned about liability. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to raise my hand. Apologize.
Ted, why don't you go ahead, finish your thought, and then we'll go up to John.
Well, that's just the thing is that people, whether or not that they are liable, people seem concerned.
And I think Vermont actually has a law that as long as they're not doing anything intentional to create, a liability, that they are protected from that. But thanks, Ted.
John, go ahead.
I think, Susan, I saw your hand up, and you may be thinking about heading in the same direction I am.
Oh, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So, we've the strategy that we've used to date here in Jericho is really revolved around working in close partnership with our zoning administrator and the development review board. So when there is a subdivision or development or exchange of property, our zoning administrator has been great about reaching out to the Trails Committee and actually all the committees in town that would have some vested interest in the future of that property, and be able to make a formal contact with the landowner, with the engineer, were that the case, and have a chance to make a formal request if trails currently on their land are already part of a connected network or have been identified as being critical to connectivity given our future vision. But again, that strategy relies heavily on neighborliness and the idea of contribution. And the official map that Susan had referenced earlier is something that, from a place of authority has more teeth moving forward. And I think, it is a big ask for people. And I think strategically to make these networks connected and vibrant and really in a positioned in a place to be of the value we see them to be in the community, being able to offer fair market value and purchase of those easements is likely the most intelligent way to go. I wish it were different, but in our experience at this point, that's kind of where things seem to be heading.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Susan, do you want to add on? Susan, do you want to add to what John said?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
We think about it as planners, or even as part of this conversation, a little bit of like all or nothing. But I had somewhat of an aha thought, just thinking about the conversation, is that maybe if there were a facility to allow landowners to kind of like try before you buy, where you could potentially have a 3-year arrangement, doesn't necessarily, maybe it's not technically an easement, but it's an agreement with a landowner to allow passage through their property, because a lot of people don't want to give it permanently, but maybe because they worry that it's going to affect their value or it's going to be a bad experience. But if there were a structured way of offering people a somewhat temporary, like if it's not permanent, it doesn't mean it doesn't have value to the community, because it might be in place for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. And I've never really thought about that before, like there must be something in between, totally informal, at the whim. The landowner can change their mind at any minute and they don't want to tell anybody, to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is a permanent easement. Is there something in between that has kind of rules and structure that would enable people to see the value and the benefit, and then they could renew that arrangement or they could cancel that arrangement? Wouldn't that still be valuable? So just a question. Kind of, so you're saying, Susan said, is this a crazy idea? And I'm like, I don't think it's a crazy idea, but maybe if there were a way to put it in a box, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I see in the chat that Zoe suggests that might already exist. So that's something that we can look into as we work on the active transportation plans, when there's policy levers. Like, it doesn't have to be a permanent type of a situation. It could be, let's try it out and see how it goes. Steve, go ahead.
Interesting conversation to listen to everyone. And I recognize that I might be naive about what's already happened, but it seems reasonable to me that this could happen, the coordination could happen more locally. I mean, how about a conversation, sitting down with a map, someone from Jericho and someone from Essex, and just looking at potential links between Saxon Hill Park and, you know, something in Jericho, to take a look at what actually exists now. Excuse me. To take a look at what actually exists now and experiment with potential links. So before you ever talking with people who own property or whatever, what does the map tell you about some areas that would be a good avenue of connecting current properties? So, you know, I'd like to investigate that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And again, you can go to that map, and if you think creating, you know, connecting those, like put that line on a map as a starting point for a conversation. I know that people on the call are interested in connecting those areas. So,
right.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, Adam, please.
Thank you. I noticed in the comments from Bill and Abby talking about the liability, and I just thought I would add that for anybody that doesn't know this, like as an off-road connection that's part of like a VEMBA network, that also comes with liability exemption. So that's one thing on the trail connectivity side, that as a landowner signs on to provide access, it comes with liability exemption. But also to Abby's point, I've been thinking about this a lot as this discussion goes on, and VAST, and how they've, you know, gotten a lot of easements from, you know, farmers and other folks because it's transportation way. And I think that, you know, this whole time I've been thinking like, well, how do we establish that in the summer? Like we have the winter connections, we have a lot of connectivity between, you know, the state, you know, some of those farm roads could, you know, potentially be rights of way and access points for transportation needs, not necessarily like full scale recreation, but just a thought to throw on the table, because I have been thinking a lot about VAST and how they've established this statewide network.
Great, thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. Barrett.
And to Susan's point about shorter term permissions, we've had a problem with that with if you're going to put in any kind of infrastructure that requires a grant or something like that. Grant donors require longer term agreements. The shortest I have seen, I was part of an organization that had an agreement with the state where we needed to acquire a 10-year easement. But a lot of times they really want to see, we don't want to invest in something that's going to revert to private ownership in 3 years. So that is something to consider. And I would also say that people not cleaning up after their dogs is an oft cited reason that people don't want to allow access to their lands. So that is, I know it's a problem everywhere. I see it everywhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, I am keeping an eye on our time. I appreciate you giving us an hour and a half this morning. I think to roll into a conclusion, and again, thanks to everyone for sharing the comments. You know, we're recording this meeting, which we can share with you, and others on your committees or locally that want to be, you know, be the conversation are welcome to. You know, just to follow up, in terms of the active transportation plan, as I mentioned, April and May, we're really going to be ramping up our public outreach efforts. You know, this is sort of our first foray into having these conversations, which is really great. The committee itself will probably meet again in June when we have some of the earlier tasks from the consultant coming up. And I think, you know, to end the conversation, you know, we're just curious, you know, what can we do for you? What are the next steps that you'd like to see, either from me at the RPC, Jonathan at Local Motion? I think there's been a lot of interesting policy sort of questions that are raised that I flagged that we can bring back to our team. how do you want to continue this conversation? Are you interested in having sort of these bike trail committee meetings on a regular, semi-regular basis, just to connect with each other, share opportunities and ideas?
Brian, I like the idea of periodic meetings of this group, similar to the housing meetings that CCRPC hosts.
Okay. John.
I just wanted to remind people about the Walk Bike Summit coming up in May too, Brian. If you and Jonathan weren't planning on that, I found that a really valuable way to connect with folks from other municipalities who are doing the important work of expanding bike pedestrian travel, recreational trail access and connectivity in their communities. Believe it's happening on the 9th of May in Montpelier. Is that
May
right?
6th, May 6th in Middlebury. Yeah.
There you go. I had the M's right and the dates wrong. But yeah, forwarding that information would be great.
Yeah, I see Jonathan just dropped the link in the chat. Registration's open. Looks, there's 4 different tracks, some really great sessions in there. So if you're able to make it, that would be great. And it got canceled in 2020, so this is kind of a redo. It's like a bonus. Great. Well, again, I just want to offer a hearty thank you again for your time this morning, for your contributions. I'm a resource for you, so please be in touch with me if you think of anything afterwards. And any, Jonathan, any final comments from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, thank you all. I think this is a really great discussion. I've got some interesting ideas for programming that we can take forward. So thank you all for your time.
Yeah, great. And I'll be in touch with you. We're going to add you to our sort of active transportation plan mailing list, just so you're aware of next steps and other opportunities to contribute and so on. But thank you very much. I'm going to copy the chat so we have that, touch up my notes, watch the video again. I know there's some good tidbits I missed. So have a great Thursday. Don't be a stranger. Nice to see you.
Thank you all.
Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye all.